Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown. So sometimes we have events in the real world that are rather momentous that prove to be either influential with our areas of interest, or sometimes they coincide with our areas of interest. I mean, case in point, we have all this talk about World War III going on right now. And to be fair, I mean, World War III is something that's been speculated about for decades, but we're at a point where it's a very real possibility. I mean, we have the situation in the Middle East, we have the situation with Russia, and while I'm hoping that things are resolved in a manner that does not involve an earth-shattering catastrophe that is man-made or non-man-made in nature, it's very hard to look at the big picture and come away feeling hopeful. And just it really feels like humanity is not in a good place right now. And so with that being said, I found it kind of funny in a rather morbid sort of way that the very next thing I was going to be reviewing was a piece that was about the end of the world, or at least the fallout from World War III. And the piece in question is a 3-hour cable miniseries called On the Beach, which was made in 2000, and it was directed by Russell Mulcahy. And this kind of coincided, all this stuff about the end of the world in real life, I mean, it just kind of happened to, kind of come into play, when I was making my way towards reviewing this, because I was on a bit of a Russell Mulcahy marathon, amongst other movie and book marathons. But Russell Mulcahy is the Australian director who got his start in music videos and did a lot of groundbreaking work with several artists throughout the 80s, and he applied a lot of the tricks they learned from music videos towards his approach to cinematic filmmaking. And so when he was on, and he was able to turn out some very visually elaborate films. I mean, case in point, you got movies like Razorback, Highlander, The Shadow. And so, I mean, even the movies that I've seen of his that aren't quite good, but are, say, decent at best, they tend to be very visually vibrant and full of life. And so, you could definitely tell that, the guy got his start in the area of, say, artistic, music videos, and only went forward when it came to, say, making cinematic work. But with all that being said, though, I have to say that this miniseries they did was probably one of his best works, in my opinion. I mean, granted, I still think Highlander is probably his best movie, hands down. But as far as, say, something that hits home on an emotional level, this was actually pretty good. And I was very surprised to, find something that, in some ways, I felt like it was atypical of his work, at least in the sense of his stuff that is more well known by the public. Because, I mean, you got something like Razorback or Highlander, that tend to be very atmospheric on a visual level, but at the same time, there is a human story involved in such movies at the same time, just maybe in a horrific or fantastical situation. But here, though, there's nothing fantastical about this situation. I mean, you could say, yes, this is in the realm of science fiction since it involves World War III or the fallout from World War III, but at the same time, like, there's no robots, there's no spaceships or anything like that, no aliens, no sorcerers or anything. It's just ordinary humanity on the brink of extinction. And I have to say that at the end of the day, I mean, this was a good this was something that was good. And I have to say that it was based on a novel by a gentleman named Neville Shute, which was written in 1957, and the novel itself was called On the Beach. And it came out around the time that the Cold War was going on. So you had the standoff between America and Russia, and so I haven't actually read the novel, but from what I understand, it's something that can still be rather hard hitting. If you can accept the fact that technology and science have, progressed a lot since the 1950s. And so in turn, it was made into a black and white movie in 1959, also called On the Beach, which had an all-star cast which had Gregory Peck, Ava Gardner, Fred Astaire, Anthony Perkins, and several others. And I haven't seen that movie either, and you'd think I would with all those actors being involved, but it's on my list of things to check out in the near future, hopefully. But so this was the second adaptation of the novel, and so I can't really compare it to the previous adaptation or the source material, but on its own, it's a pretty good work. And so this was made in 2000, but it takes place in the year 2006. And basically, what starts World War III is China blockading Taiwan, and America gets involved, and things escalate to a point where there's a nuclear exchange of missiles. And basically life in the Northern Hemisphere is wiped out. And as it happens, there's just so much radiation that's been released from all this nuclear weaponry being let out, that there's basically this radioactive death cloud that's encompassing the world. And at this point, the only place in the world that is legitimately safe at this point is Australia. And there's talk of other pockets of civilization, still surviving here and there, but at the same time, a lot of the chatter that Australia is receiving from these pockets of civilization is dying down. And so Australia, for all intents and purposes, is the last place in the world where humanity is safe. And so the crew of the Charleston, or Charlestown, a U.S. submarine that's led by Commander Dwight Towers, as played by Armand Asante, makes its way to Australia after confirming that everything in the Northern Hemisphere is gone. I mean, like, there's ruins and everything, but there's no life and what have you. And so they go to Australia and turn themselves over, to the Australian government, and put themselves and the submarine at, the disposal of the Australian government. And it's around this time that, there's a bit of a, science, project going on, or military slash science project going on, wherein the Australian, government and military have determined that there's a possibility that in the Northern Hemisphere radiation may have dropped enough to where life is sustainable. And I forgot the exact science, but the whole idea is that they're thinking that the death cloud is going to start spreading downwards towards the Southern Hemisphere. But in doing so, it's going to leave the Northern Hemisphere open, and livable. And so they're wanting to take an expedition, over, to the Northern Hemisphere to confirm that. And then basically, they're saying that, okay, we know that we can't, if this works, if life is possible in North America, we know we can only take a certain amount of people to North America, and we're not going to be able to take everyone in Australia there. So it's going to be a very exclusive list of people who get on there. But what they're wanting to do, though, is they're wanting to use the submarine that Towers has just brought to them, and they're wanting him to lead the expedition to go back into the Northern Hemisphere, and just to confirm that, because even though he just got back from the Northern Hemisphere, there wasn't enough time for this radiation to supposedly dissipate up north. And so Towers, I mean, he's very skeptical about this, but at the same time, you know, the government officials are saying that, hey, you know, we know that this, you know, death cloud, it's going to be coming our way. It's going to be coming to Australia. So if there's a chance that, you know, life can go on elsewhere in the world, if there's a chance that the radiation is dissipating, then we need to take it if it means to save the lives of the human race, or what's left of it. And so Towers, I mean, you know, he sees the logic in this, and he agrees to, you know, lead the mission. You know, but one of the first things that they do is they need to bring in a scientist by the name of Dr. Julian Osborne, played by Brian Brown. And he's become a bit of a recluse as of late, you know, kind of on an island retreat, you know, sort of drinking, you know, his days away, because, you know, he's convinced that, you know, there is no hope whatsoever. I mean, he's gone over all these calculations and what have you, you know, basically, you know, proving that regardless of how you cut it, humanity is going to be wiped out. There is nowhere safe in the world, and the radiation is not going to dissipate. So, you know, he's basically just, you know, going to spend his remaining, you know, time as he sees fit. But, you know, Towers and a couple of his men, you know, they come to, you know, take him, and, you know, they have to knock him out, you know, to bring him along. And so once they bring him, you know, to the government officials, I mean, Dr. Osborne starts, you know, going back and forth with the officials and Towers, you know, basically saying that, you know, you guys are wrong. This theory is entirely unsound, you know, and it's just a suicide mission for this crew here. And so, you know, basically, you know, he reluctantly agrees to, you know, go on the mission, you know, even though he's wholly against the idea of it having any merit. But at the same time, though, he's afraid that if, you know, they send someone else, you know, like say another scientist, you know, then the scientist is going to get all the data wrong, because, I mean, he himself, I mean, you know, while there are other scientists that were working on, you know, theories and everything, like he's the one who he feels like he's the only one who knows for a fact that this is what's going to happen. And so basically he's just, you know, there to, as a bit of a reluctant advisor. But, you know, prior to them embarking on this mission, though, they're given a bit of, you know, time to sort of wind down, as it were. And this allows for us to get to know some of the crew and, you know, see their interactions with, you know, the people in Australia. And there's two points of focus here. One is a bit of a love story / love triangle with Dwight Towers and a civilian woman named Moira, who's played by Rachel Ward. And it turns out that Moira was the ex-fiancée of Dr. Osborne. And so there's a bit of a love triangle there, because, you know, for some dumb reason, you know, Dr. Osborne, you know, left her at the altar, you know, when they were, you know, going to get married. And so, you know, he's still kicking himself for this. And so even though he thinks the world's going to end, you know, he's wanting to try and make amends and say, please give me another chance, you know, but she's all like, you know, I mean, you know, what you did was, you know, there's no going back from that. And so basically she and Commander Towers, you know, the two of them actually end up, you know, getting to, you know one another and end up, you know, falling in love. And the reason that they met, though, I mean, one of the reasons that they get so close, though, is because his Australian liaison, excuse me a sec, a guy named, let's see, Lieutenant Holmes, you know, he's a member of the Australian Navy, you know, but he's to be, you know, a liaison, you know, with the submarine crew. you know, acting on behalf of the Australian government. But it turns out that Moira is in fact his sister-in-law, and so when he invites Towers over, to their house, that's when the two of them Moira and Towers run into each other again, because the two of them had actually met prior, to this family get together, and like they'd met on a train, and they kind of struck up a friendship there. But once Lieutenant Holmes, as played by Grant Bowler, basically invites Towers to stay at his family's home, and then Myra's there, I mean, sparks ignite. And so basically you have a look into, say, the family life of Lieutenant Holmes and his wife Mary, as played by Jacqueline McKenzie, and their little girl too. And also, of course, you have this budding romance between Towers and Dwight Towers and Moira. And of course you have Julian, Dr. Osborne, he keeps on popping up, trying to stop things between them and say, hey, give me another chance, Moira. And so initially it feels like it's a bit of a love story, or a well done soap opera, albeit with the end of the world being kind of a backdrop. And it's interesting how, like, in the first part, because it's a 2-part miniseries. In the first part, I mean, there's a lot of effort made to build up the characters and develop them, and so I guess to get the audience more invested in them. And there are points where, at least in my experience, there were a couple of points where I was lulled into a false sense of security, and almost forgot about the fact that this is a movie about the end of the world. And so, there'd be moments where I was getting caught up in, the drama and the family drama, of, Lieutenant Holmes and, his wife Mary and their little girl, and of course, and then, the love triangle between Towers and Moira and Osborne, right? But then something would happen that would serve as a stark reminder that no, the end of the world is still on the horizon. And so I thought that those moments, especially in the first part, were rather jarring, because sometimes they'd be subtle, such as a point where, Lieutenant Holmes, before he goes on the mission with the American submarine crew to go into the Northern Hemisphere, he goes to this pharmacy, and he's asking the pharmacist there if he has a stash of the government issued suicide medication, some of which are pills and some of which are injectable, like mainly for children. The injectable version is for children and animals, whereas the pills are for adults, right? But there was talk about this kind of on a need-to-know basis, and so since he's in the military, well, he kind of has knowledge of this. And so there's a very quiet scene where he goes to his pharmacy, and the way Grant Ballard plays this, I thought was very subdued and yet solemn. But he's asking the pharmacist if they got any of those of the suicide medication. And so the pharmacist is all like, well, I'm sorry, sir, but the government was very strict about issuing the medication only at the worst case scenario. And so Holmes is having to explain to him that, hey, I'm going on a mission with the American submarine crew, and it's top secret, right? But I may not be back in time, to see my wife and kid again, but we're trying to find out if there's, but he basically lets slip that, the mission he's on may hold some hope for humanity, but at the same time, he's saying that he doesn't know if he's going to get back in time to, see his wife alive again, because of the impending, radioactive death cloud. And so the pharmacist is all like, okay, look, I'm not supposed to give these out, but here, go ahead and take them. And he's like, we're all going to be dead anyway, but good luck. I hope you'll find what you're looking for, that kind of thing. So you have moments like that sort of slip in that are kind of calm, quiet and subtle. And then you have moments where you kind of get caught up in, the, dare I say it, happiness and festivity of, the budding romance between, Towers and Moira. And, Armand Assante and Rachel Ward, I mean, the two of them, they play very well off of each other. And so you have, this, submarine commander who, I mean, is a capable leader of men and everything, but, he's kind of, recovering from tragedy, what with, his wife and kids having, been casualties of, World War III, what with them being in America at the time it happened. And so he's kind of recovering from that. But once he's, interacting with, Moira, Armand Assante does a really good job of showing this guy who's kind of closed off his emotions initially, but at the same time, he does have some, spark of life to him. Like he kind of has to as a leader of men, but also, in the civilian world, he starts to come back. And, when he and Moira are together, you definitely see that there's a connection there. And you're kind of wanting the relationship to, succeed, because they're so good at, playing off of one another. And Rachel Ward, I thought, was very, well, I mean, she was very capable in the role, because she played, this, civilian woman who, I mean, she doesn't know about the ins and outs of military stuff, and she catches a bit of science from, Julian and everything. But, I mean, at the end of the day, she's just a civilian woman who, happens to, just kind of, be in a spot in the world that is waiting for this impending, doom to come. But she's just, basically determined to try and live her life, as much as she can, and, just be there with her family and everything. And so, seeing her and her zest for life in this grim situation, is sort of bringing out the, I guess you could say, optimism in Armand Assante's character, Towers. I mean, I thought that was, a pretty good dynamic there. And so, so yeah, I mean, the first half, does a good job of, developing these characters. And also, I forgot to mention, there's the character of First Officer Neil Hirsch, as played by Steve Bastani, who, if I remember correctly, he's Italian-Australian in real life. But anyway, though, no, he plays, the first officer of Commander Towers' crew. And I liked his character because, he was kind of like the more easygoing version of Towers when it came to, say, how he was with the submarine crew and everything. Like, there was more levity on his part. But at the same time, though, when it came to, say, the serious stuff, I mean, he was actually, very capable in the part. And, like when he's trying to, keep certain characters, together, as far as, when certain characters are in the process of having a mental breakdown or something like that, he does a good job of, being the friend there who say, hey, you've got, you gotta snap out of it. We've got shit to do, that kind of thing. Pardon my language, but yeah, I mean, he's that kind of character. And I gotta say, like, there's this really funny scene where, once, the submarine crew goes on its mission, you got him and Dr. Osborne playing, this sort of eating game, I guess you could say, because Osborne's, constantly berating the American food, because it's an American submarine, right? And he's saying, Australian food is so much better. And when it comes to like spicy stuff, Australians have, the Americans beat. And so, Neil Hirsch's character, Steve Bastani plays him to where he's like, okay, we're gonna settle this. And so basically he has this food brought out, it's like noodles or something, and he has the chef bring out the spiciest sauce that they have and just covers it with, he covers the noodles, with the spicy stuff. And so the two of them, they sort of have this eat off, where, one of them will take a bite and then the other one will take a bite. And like they're both sweating and everything. And the crew in the mess hall here, they're all like, on the edge of their seats, like some of them are bedding and everything. And then, Julian, he's the one who breaks, Mr. Oh, Australians are cuisine's better than American. He breaks and just bolts for the door, to, get as much cold water as he can. And it's only after that happens that Hirsch, finally just, grabs, the water pitcher that he had but was refusing to drink from until the other guy broke. I mean, I thought that was actually pretty funny, though, because you saw how, you saw two very different characters, but in this, competition, you had this strange moment of, male bonding, if you will. But also it just kind of, I thought in some way did a good job of showing, Bastani doing nice work with a character who's a leader in more ways than one. Because, I mean, he knew that in this trivial situation, he was nonetheless representing his nation's pride. And considering that this American submarine crew, they're the last Americans in the world as far as everyone else knows, he's like, yeah, I gotta represent. I mean, this is all fun and games, but I'm not letting this guy shit talk, our cuisine, So you have moments of levity like that, but that also go a long way towards developing the characters. But yeah, so like the first part, I thought did a really good job of, developing the characters and everything and getting you invested. So when, this talked about, potential suicide mission comes up, because they don't even know if, they're going to find any signs of, habitation, up in, the Northern Hemisphere. But things do take an interesting turn, though, when they get a message, and it seems to be an automated message, but it's at certain intervals, throughout the day, and it's coming from Anchorage, Alaska. And they're like, okay, we know that life's wiped out there, but someone's sending that message, even if it's automated, like someone had to have put that into play, so we need to find out, one, if there's any signs, if it's habitable at all in the Northern Hemisphere, and two, who's sending that message. And so that's where things take on a more urgent turn, for the crew. And so when the actual mission kicks off, that's when I think the movie goes from nice love story development or family drama, to, okay, we're on the edge of extinction here, but there's a little bit of hope, and even if it's unlikely, we need to go for it. And so I thought that, tonally speaking, the second half did a nice job of showing the harsh reality of impending disaster. And because it goes between, the the American crew on the submarine, and then it cuts to, life in Australia. And so like in the first half, when it was kind of idyllic, but nonetheless, there was talk about the end of the world, in the second half of the miniseries, it gets to where, reality starts to rear its ugly head. Like petrol is in very short supply. Food is in short supply. And so you start to see the citizenry of Australia, start to, go crazy and revolt, and it's not a pretty picture. And so you contrast that, with, the more, I guess you could say, measured determination of the submarine crew, I mean, it's a rather interesting contrast, and it shows you exactly what's on the line here. And even if there is something to this theory that life is habitable in the Northern Hemisphere, they're not going to be able to save everyone. But yeah, all in all, though, I thought that this was a very well done miniseries. It was thought provoking, it was moving, and I think that like the only downside I could think of as far as, say, the actual miniseries go, well, okay, there are a couple of things. One is the character of Dr. Osborne, as played by Brian Brown, and Brian Brown is a good actor. I mean, I remember him with Sigourney Weaver in the movie Gorillas in the Mist. Sad movie, but good movie, right? But and he's good here, okay? But the problem is, when it comes to the when it comes to that love triangle, he comes across as a very intrusive individual. And maybe that's the point of his character, at least as far as the love triangle is concerned. But the way that he's written, though, it's like he pops up out of nowhere at one time or another, only to say the same thing. Like, he's like, Moira, I made the biggest mistake of my life by walking away from you. And usually he's drunk when he says it, right? But this happens more than once. And it almost always happens when, Armida DeSante as Towers and Rachel Ward as Moira are, bonding or connecting with one another. So you get drawn into their story, and then Julian pops up, or Dr. Osborne pops up and ruins it, And so it's funny because, like, when it comes to, say, love stories and stuff like that, I mean, I'm not like, say, huge into romance or anything like that, but at the same time, I appreciate it when a love story is told well. And so when it comes to the characters of Commander Towers and Moira, I was on board with them because the chemistry between Armin DeSante and Rachel Ward was very well done, and basically kind of served as a microcosm of what this mission was trying to preserve as far as hope and humanity. Whereas when Julian popped up, I mean, when it came to, say, the love story aspect of the movie, he was bothersome. But when, on the other hand, though, when it was just him and the submarine crew, I liked his character, because, I mean, you have that sort of, playful antagonism that comes into play. Or, I'm sorry, you have that bit of playful antagonism that he, initially, tries to, brush up as some real tough guy bravado, but then somewhere along the way, he actually begins to, bond with the submarine crew and what have you. And to some extent, he has a sort of grudging, frenemy type relationship with Towers. And there's a rather telling moment where he and Towers are arguing, and they almost come to blows, and Towers is, basically, just, livid with him, saying, basically accusing him of, wanting, this mission to be a failure and being happy to be right, if it turns out that his calculations are all true, meaning that there's no hope whatsoever. But Brian Brown, when he responds to this, it's something along the lines of, a very subdued, believe me, this is an instance where I hope I'm wrong. And it's a rather nice little moment for, Brian Brown's character, because it showed that, yeah, he's a bit of an egotistical, but at the same time, at the end of the day, even he cares about humanity, and even he's, wanting there to be some measure of hope, even though he thinks it's highly unlikely. So when it came to him and being with the submarine crew, I liked him then more than, say, when the love story was involved, because as I've mentioned, the love story between Towers and Moira was actually very well done. Now, on the other hand, though, when it comes to, say, like, the glimpse into the family life of Lieutenant Holmes and his wife Mary, as played by Jacqueline McKenzie, that was, an instance where um, we see straight up what, this mission's all about. They're trying to, basically give a semblance of hope to what's left of humanity. And you see, this husband and wife and their little girl, basically, trying to, maintain life as a family together, even there, though there's this very real possibility of extinction going on. And, so when you have, all this talk about, the government issuing suicide pills and everything, um, while while Holmes already knew about it, his his wife, when things begin to look more dire, I mean, what with breakdown in Australia at a certain point, I mean, when she's having to confront the reality of it, I mean, it's a pretty spooky scene, because she was an otherwise strong woman up until this point, but then when things start to look like, yeah, there is no hope, then yeah, you see a rather convincing breakdown. And so it's like the interactions that Holmes and his family had, I thought were very well done, and they really felt like a family. And so once more, we're given reason to care about the characters and their mission, and what have you, and or I should say the mission to try and save what's left of humanity, or what can be saved of humanity. And it's these glimpses into these characters' lives that kind of give the movie leverage, I guess. And another thing though is that there's a lot of use of real life locations in Australia. And seeing as how Russell Mulcahy is Australian, he probably had some pull as far as being able to shoot in certain areas. And it was really cool to see, because sometimes you have it where there's like a bunch of in some stuff, some TV shows, it'll just be like a CGI rendition of a part of a country. But here though, no, it's actually in legitimate parts of Australia. And so when it comes to those scenes, I thought that they did a pretty good job of making Australia look like something that on was initially idyllic, and trying to go about, the people there are trying to go about their day-to-day lives. But as time goes on and this death cloud's getting closer, you just see things start to break down. And I don't just mean people, but you see industries start to break down and everything. And so they actually did a pretty good job of making Australia look like something that was going through a situation like that. And there are several jarring scenes of people committing suicide at certain points in the miniseries, and this is in Australia, mind you, but it definitely makes things look more immediate and impactful when it happens. And a lot of people who have talked about this miniseries have actually pointed that out. And so I mean, it's like, even if they didn't like the miniseries, they said that they were kind of shaken or moved by the instances of, say, either people committing suicide out of a desire to avoid a prolonged death by radiation, or committing suicide by way of taking the government issued suicide medication, like lines forming for stuff like that, literally. So yeah, they did a really good job of making Australia look like it was really going through something like that. And for a cable miniseries, I thought they did a pretty good job. But let's see. So aside from Brian Brown's character being a bit of an obstacle in the main love story, like there were a couple of instances where, I don't know, like overall I thought like the acting by most of the people was really good, but there were a couple of instances where like say some of the extras in the submarine crew came across as sort of hokey, but thankfully they weren't like the main thrust of the movie or anything like that. Like the most of the focus is on, like the main characters and what have you. And so when I was focusing on, the main characters and everything, in, I guess you could say, societal breakdown in Australia, I mean, I thought the movie was probably at its best. And also, of course, when the submarine crew was, going on, the quote-unquote suicide mission finally, that's where you get like the suspense and what have you. But there is an instance where I think that they made the mistake of, using CGI as opposed to, say, something practical as far as special effects go, because there is a scene towards later on in the miniseries where a character commits suicide by way of using a racing car, or a car, like a very fast car, like a Ferrari, to basically go around this racetrack at top speed, and they end up literally killing themselves by crashing themselves to death, and it's supposed to be an impactful scene, because it's sort of a montage of things happening, right? But unfortunately, when this character commits suicide by way of crashing their car, I mean, it's initially it's like a oh crap moment, but then it cuts to this really bad CGI mock-up of a race car, crashing into a wall, and like you see a tire fly out, almost like a bad 3D type thing, and it's really jarring, and I know it's just one scene, but it's something that really took me out of it. Like, I mean, I was able to get back into it, but when you have something that's that visually shoddy, in what's supposed to be an intense or moving scene, it really detracts from the power of the moment, and so I mean, I was able to get back into it because I had been invested with the rest of the miniseries. But when you have something like that at this late in the game, at such an important moment in the miniseries, I just think, like, why didn't they just use practical effects? Because I mean, there was a scene earlier in the miniseries where some characters, they're out driving, and they almost get into a wreck because there's this car is stalled in the middle of the road, and it turns out it's these people that they're looking out at the ocean, and they end up driving off the cliff, they like driving through the guardrail into onto the beach, which is like a bazillion feet down, right? And so the car blows up and everything with these people inside, and so the characters who see this, I mean, they're all like, oh my god, so when that happened, I mean, that scene I thought was very well done, because emotionally speaking, you're like, I had that kind of reaction. And also, there wasn't any crappy CGI. It was like a real car, going off a cliff, and so so I'm just thinking, like, when it comes to the bad CGI scene that's later in the miniseries, I'm just thinking, like, why couldn't they have just done something like they did earlier, like have a real car crash, or something like that. I mean, that would have been a good way to maintain the mood, but yeah, so it just, that part really stuck out like a sore thumb. But I guess the other thing is, to some extent, is the runtime. It's like a 3-hour runtime, or 3 hour and 15 minutes, I think. But like, me personally, like, overall, like, I didn't necessarily mind the slow burn approach. Like I said earlier, I thought it did a good job of kind of lulling you into a false sense of security, in a sense of getting you invested in this love story or the family drama. But then there'd be points where I'd be like, they could have cut some time off to move things along, that kind of thing. Like, I can't really point to a scene in particular, but I do think that if they had maybe spruced up the dialogue of Brian Brown's character, like when he's, trying to, win Moira back, or maybe just kind of downplayed his part in general, like, and gave him a more, like maybe kept, the stuff he had on the submarine, but, maybe trimmed some of the stuff off in the love triangle. I think that, things might have flowed better. But as it is, I mean, there are parts where I think they could have trimmed it down just a little bit, just to make it a little more concise. But I mean, overall, though, I thought it was a concise miniseries. It just, yeah, it's like anything else. I mean, there are things that could be done better, but overall, I thought this was a reminder as to, why there are no winners in World War III, and it put a very human face on, the cost of something like that happening. So I'm going to go ahead and give On the Beach 4 out of 5 stars. This was a good miniseries, and I will say, though, just kind of word of warning, I'm not sure if all the DVDs are like this, but I got the Echo Bridge home entertainment DVD. I got it off of Amazon, and it was the only one I could find. And so Echo Bridge, I mean, they're known for releasing a lot of stuff, but they're notorious for basically being, bare bones when it comes to, say, anything in the way of special features. I mean, you're lucky if you get a trailer, that kind of thing. But basically, as far as features go, there's nothing, and like there's a scene selection bit, but that's it. Like there's no subtitles, nothing. But the worst part about it is that for this, I don't know if it's like this for every DVD release, but for this particular release, for the Echo Bridge home release version, I would recommend, avoid reading, the back of the DVD, because it literally gives away the whole miniseries, like everything, from the beginning to end. And so, I mean, if you're wanting to avoid spoilers, I mean, if you get the DVD, do your best to avoid looking at the back of it, or maybe just if you can find it online, watch it online or something. That might be a better bet, just to kind of avoid spoilers, because because you really do get invested, with the characters here. And so when you already know what's going to happen to them by reading the back of it, it sort of robs from, I guess you could say, the momentum and the power, of the miniseries. But I mean, unfortunately, see, when I was looking at the back of it, when I got the DVD in the mail, I didn't know it was going to be, that revealing. And so I had a, bit of a, really, I already know what's going to happen. But then again, when I actually watched it, though, I still found myself to be, moved at times, so, and that kind of shows that, hey, the people who put this thing together, like the miniseries, like they actually did a good job, the writing and the acting, so you still cared. But anyway, though, yeah, so that was my take on the Beach. 4 stars out of 5. It would have been cool if there'd been like something in the way of special features, like maybe at least a making of featurette or something like that, or maybe depending on how long ago the DVD or was released or something like that. It would have been interesting if there'd been like some retrospective documentary put in, like some of the cast and crew involved. But nothing in the way of special features. So. But other than that, though, I mean, it was a good miniseries, and it told its story well. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Goodbye.